The night the billionaire disappeared, the entire city of Chicago searched for him. But nobody thought to look under the dirty blanket of a homeless man sleeping beside an old office building. His name was Nathaniel Brooks, a billionaire whose company controlled dozens of buildings across the United States. He owned luxury apartments, hotels, restaurants, and several skyscrapers. Yet he had begun to wonder whether the people around him cared about him or only about his money. So, without telling his family, employees, or security team, Nathaniel made a strange decision. He dressed himself in worn-out clothes, covered his expensive watch, left his phone behind, and walked into the streets pretending to be homeless. He wanted to discover one simple truth. If he had nothing, would anyone still treat him like a human being? For 3 cold days, Nathaniel experienced a world he had only seen through the windows of his limousine. People walked past him without looking. Some avoided him as though poverty were contagious. Others laughed quietly when he asked whether they could spare some food. A businessman named Gregory passed him twice and complained that people like him were ruining the neighborhood. Nathaniel swallowed his anger because this was exactly what he had come to understand. But on the 4th evening, rain began pouring across the city. Nathaniel found shelter behind one of his own office buildings, unaware that the person who would change his life forever was working inside. Before we continue, if you believe kindness and second chances can change someone's life, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel for more emotional stories. The building's night janitor was a quiet man named Samuel Carter. Samuel was 58 years old and had worked there for almost 11 years. He wasn't wealthy. In fact, he lived in a tiny rented apartment with his teenage grandson, Caleb, after losing his daughter several years earlier. Samuel's paycheck barely covered rent, groceries, and school expenses, but there was something he considered more valuable than money: dignity. When he finished cleaning the lobby that night, he noticed Nathaniel sitting outside beneath the narrow roof, soaked from the rain and shivering. Samuel could have ignored him. Nobody would have blamed him. Instead, he opened the side door and quietly told Nathaniel he could sit inside for a while. Nathaniel looked at him suspiciously and asked whether the building manager would be angry. Samuel simply shrugged and said that being cold was punishment enough. He disappeared into the janitor's room and returned with a dry jacket, a sandwich, and a cup of hot coffee. Nathaniel stared at the food as though it were something precious. Samuel noticed his hesitation and told him not to worry about paying him back. He explained that sometimes people don't need money. They just need someone to remember that they are human. Those words struck Nathaniel harder than anything he had heard in years. He had spent his entire adult life surrounded by executives, lawyers, investors, and people who smiled before asking him for something. Yet this stranger had given him food without even knowing his name. That night, Samuel allowed Nathaniel to sleep in an unused storage room. He found an old blanket and placed it on a chair beside him. Nathaniel barely slept. He kept thinking about the irony of the situation. The storage room belonged to him. The building belonged to him. The company that employed Samuel belonged to him. Yet the janitor was the richest man in the building, not financially, but in kindness. The next morning, Samuel brought Nathaniel breakfast before starting his shift. He even gave him a small list of places where homeless people could receive meals and warm clothing. Nathaniel asked why Samuel cared so much. Samuel smiled sadly and explained that years earlier, when his own life had fallen apart, one stranger had helped him without asking questions. He had promised himself that if he ever had the chance, he would do the same for someone else. Over the next 2 days, Nathaniel continued his disguise, but his experiment had changed completely. He no longer wanted to test people. He wanted to understand Samuel. He watched him clean floors while executives walked past without saying hello. He watched Samuel pick up papers left behind by careless employees and quietly fix things nobody noticed. Then one afternoon, Nathaniel saw Samuel receive a phone call that left him deeply worried. Caleb's school fees were overdue, and Samuel didn't know how he would manage them. Nathaniel almost revealed himself immediately, but something stopped him. He wanted to help Samuel without turning kindness into a transaction. The following morning, Nathaniel finally returned to his mansion. His security team was stunned to see him alive and safe after days of searching. His chief executive, Richard Hayes, rushed into the room demanding an explanation. Nathaniel said nothing about the experiment. Instead, he ordered his legal team to prepare something unusual: He asked them to review the employment records of every worker in his company, especially the janitorial staff. Then he instructed them to investigate the conditions under which their lowest-paid employees were living. What he discovered embarrassed him. While executives received enormous bonuses, many workers struggled with medical bills, rent, school expenses, and basic necessities. Nathaniel called an emergency meeting. Richard assumed it would be about profits, but Nathaniel walked into the conference room wearing the same expensive suit he had abandoned several days earlier. He placed a photograph of Samuel on the table and told everyone that the man in the picture had shown more leadership than many executives in that room. Nathaniel revealed that he had disguised himself as a homeless man and that Samuel was the only employee who had stopped to help him without knowing who he was. The room became silent. Nathaniel announced a new employee assistance program, emergency housing support, education grants for workers' children, and better wages for the company's lowest-paid employees. But Nathaniel wasn't finished. He personally visited Samuel's apartment. Samuel opened the door and froze when he saw the billionaire standing there. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Nathaniel handed him an envelope containing enough money to clear Caleb's school expenses and several months of rent. Samuel immediately tried to refuse it, explaining that he hadn't helped that homeless man because he wanted anything in return. Nathaniel smiled and told him that was exactly why he deserved it. He explained that Samuel had reminded him that wealth meant very little if it couldn't be used to make someone's life better. Months later, Samuel was promoted to Director of Community Support for Nathaniel's company. He didn't sit in a luxurious office and forget where he came from. Instead, he spent his days visiting workers, listening to their problems, and making sure nobody was treated as invisible. Nathaniel also changed. He stopped measuring success only by buildings, profits, and numbers. He began visiting shelters, supporting community programs, and quietly helping families who had fallen on difficult times. One evening, Nathaniel and Samuel stood outside the same building where everything had begun. The rain was falling lightly, just as it had on that unforgettable night. Nathaniel looked at Samuel and admitted that he had gone into the streets thinking he was searching for proof that people were selfish. Instead, he found one ordinary man who reminded him that kindness still existed. Samuel simply smiled and said that sometimes the people with the least money are the ones who understand the true value of giving. If this story touched your heart, please support this video with a like, share it with someone who believes in kindness, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need a little hope today. And before the story ends, comment, "Kindness has no price," if you believe that helping someone should never depend on how much money they have. Nathaniel remained a billionaire, but from that day forward, he measured his greatest wealth differently. It wasn't in skyscrapers or bank accounts. It was in the lives he could improve, the people he could encourage, and the kindness he could pass forward. And whenever someone asked him what the greatest investment of his life had been, he never mentioned a company, a hotel, or a $1 million deal. He simply remembered a rainy night, a cold sidewalk, and a janitor who saw a homeless man, not a billionaire, not a stranger, not a problem, but a human being who needed help.